It is not time to move on from Hubert Davis, but it is time to modernize and fill out the staff. Let's do it.
This is Tyler Hansbrough, and you're listening to Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade. You're joining me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I want to sincerely thank you for making us your first listen or watch of the day to get things going with the Tar Heels on your brain. Special shout out to all the everydayers joining us, all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and our great insiders as well. Welcome in, everyone. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Coming up today on the show, the football schedule came out earlier last week with games and Duke Week and all that. We just didn't have time to get to it, but finally, with no midweek game this week, I wanted to, square away some time for that, and so we'll look at that later on in the show. But there, for however long now, we've been talking about Carolina needing to modernize the staff in terms of fully embracing a GM, fully embracing the other roles that go along with that. And it sounds like finally now that is something that is exactly what Coach Hubert Davis intends to do. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But before that, it's Trivia Tuesday, baby. And that means it's time for a trivia question. On Monday, the USBWA, United States Basketball Writers Association, of which I am a part, by the way, released their midseason watch list. It had 50 players on it. This is the Oscar Robertson Player of the Year Award is the USBWA's National Player of the Year Award for the end of the year. Of those 50 players, right now, Ian Jackson is the only Tar Heel on it. As is always the case with these watch lists, they can change in flux at any time. So there's that. But that leads us right into our Trivia Tuesday question. 4 different Tar Heels have won the Oscar Robertson Trophy. Who are they, and what years did they win those awards? Oh, man. The answer for that is coming up at the end of the show. Stay tuned. I'd love to hear your guesses for who you think it is. Okay. There has been growing sentiment among the Carolina fan base to move on from Hubert Davis. It is quite divided. If I'm being honest, I've tried to look at all the voices I'm hearing, and it feels quite divided on yes, it's time to move on from Hubert Davis, or no, it's not time to move on from Hubert Davis. I think the yes, it's time to move on voices are louder, but I haven't taken votes to see what's more. Maybe I should, but I don't want to lean into that. Part of that is because I'm on record as not being in that camp of it's time to move on from Hubert Davis. I 100% agree with the fact that the University of North Carolina cannot and should not miss the NCAA tournament twice in a 3-year span. Heck, once is bad enough. I do understand that in the transfer portal era, there is more susceptibility to every program in terms of the peaks and valleys of year to year. I think that's something we're all going to have to get adjusted to, whether we're Carolina fans, Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, anybody else. I think it's part of the deal now. Kind of as we see that ebb and flow in the professional leagues that have a lot of player movement and contracts and stuff. So that might just be part of what we have to deal with. But let's be honest. Had there been a tournament in 2020, the Tar Heels would not have been part of it. 21, they were, but lost to Wisconsin in the first round. Coach Williams' first ever first round loss. Then 22, iffy year, but that special run at the end of the season. 23, missed the tournament. 24, 1 seed, lost in the Sweet 16 to Alabama. And this year, there are possibilities. I'm never going to say there aren't until they're literally aren't. Mathematically are no more chances. But things right now are pointing to Carolina missing again. And if they do, and again, while the 2021, they didn't technically miss it, it would essentially be like Carolina has missed 3 tournaments in a 6-season span, 2020, 23, and 25, with 21, 22, and 24 being tournaments they made. That's That's not good enough for Carolina. Obviously, that first one was still with Coach Williams, but there we go. So all that to say, again, I am on record as not being there yet. I am not in move on from Hubert Davis camp. That said, what I am a massive advocate for is for Carolina to round out their basketball staff with all the roles that you need to run a successful modern day college basketball program, including but not limited to a GM. It includes that, but other roles as well. Coach Davis seems like has been very reluctant to lean into this for one reason or another. I don't want to speculate on that. Interestingly, last year he hired, they didn't give this man this title, but a de facto GM in TJ Beisner, who they got away from Kentucky. And then from conversations and sources and other stuff, it always felt last year like never really handed over the reins to TJ in a way that he needed to be able to do that job. And so now that's not part of it. With the Oldwell management, that's completely changed all of that. And that brings us to Monday. And on Monday evening, Coach Davis seems, from his statements, to have now fully embraced the rumors we've been hearing about that Carolina has been doing some research on and some just reaching out about a GM role. And that's a real thing. Well, that is now accurate. Coach Davis on Hubert Davis Live at Top of the Hill on Monday night confirmed the GM search, saying, and I'll just read some of this quote here, quote, "I'm going to increase the staff. It's needed. I never would have thought 4 years ago when I took the job that 100% that is what is 100% what is needed is a general manager. There is so much on the plate that will take you away from doing the most important thing, coaching basketball. So we're going to hire a GM. Yeah. We need a director of marketing and fundraising for NIL for program needs. There needs to be a video coordinator with graphics and recruiting coordinator, all those different types of stuff that have to be built out, whether it's from specific hires or grad students. The old model for Carolina basketball in terms of staff size is not sustainable. For Hubert Davis to admit that is massive. I'll come back to it. It has to build out because there are so many things in play with NIL, agents, international players, etc. You need a bigger staff to maintain things, and that is so that I can coach basketball. All right, there's a lot of stuff there from Hubert Davis. First off, the biggest thing for me is I am so grateful and appreciative that Hubert Davis is now being willing and able to admit this reality, that he needs a GM, that he needs the jobs that surround that to allow him in this day and age, in this modern age of college basketball, to coach basketball, to invest in these young men, because that's what he loves, man, is he is all in on relationships and investing in who these dudes are. And so I am just so grateful for him to say that. And so to make a definitive statement, we are going to hire a GM. That's big time for him to say that. The next thing that was really interesting to me is Hubert Davis, right? Like, think about everything this man says and stands on and believes in. Carolina. And I don't mean that negatively at all. I mean it in a very positive way. Like, he loves this place and would die for it and bleed for it. And that's great. And that's what you need, while all balancing that with the recognition that the old ways of operating are gone. And so I really appreciate Coach Davis being able to say the old model for Carolina basketball in terms of staff size is not sustainable. That, again, big time for him to say that and admit it, because then it frees and allows Carolina to go do what they need to do to help him do his job best. And then the other thing is there are also so many things in play with NIL agents, international players. That's the last thing I wanted to point out from this statement is Coach's identification of international players as a critical recruiting pool to draw from. It's not just the transfer portal. It's not just incoming freshmen. There is a world out there with a lot of great players and guys to be drawn from. And I mean, you see it, like, think about Kaspers Yakachonis at Illinois, who was just having a year as a freshman, but does all this stuff. You think about Somebody like Kaman Malawach, who we just experienced playing Duke on Saturday, who played in the Olympics for South Sudan, right? Like that is an untapped market that I love that Coach Davis wants to get into. That's big time. So all of that said, then what does it mean? What do you have to do? Well, first off, this to me from an athletic department standpoint is the right way to go about doing this. As I said earlier, it the to me, it is not the right time to move on from Hubert Davis because, in my opinion, before you can move on from him, I feel like if you've given him these years, before you can say, Hubert Davis doesn't have it, he doesn't know how to do it. I think in order to appropriately decide that, you've got to fill out his staff and give him everything he needs to, again, have a modern day college basketball staff. So give him that full complement before you even consider moving on from him. And it sounds like that's what he plans to do. It sounds like from behind the scenes a little bit, that's what Bubba Cunningham intends to do as well. And it's funny because even before Coach Davis made these comments on Monday night, literally, I was going to lead off today's show by talking about this very thing to say, I am not giving in to the lowest common denominator. I have decided over the weekend that I would refuse to do a show where we say, if Carolina moves on from Hubert Davis right now, or they should move on, and here's who they should target. I just decided if I'm on record as saying Carolina shouldn't move on from Hubert Davis, then I'm not going to cater to trying to get clicks and views with names and doing that. That's just not how I'm going to operate in this specific sphere. Literally, my note said, no coaching changes until Carolina has gone all in on a GM. That's why I was so pleased to hear this news, right? This is great for Carolina. I think it's a great step in the right direction. What will it mean, though? Does it guarantee success for Carolina? And who should they go after? Who should they target? And where do they look for that? We'll go to all of that conversation in just a second. Right after I tell you about GameTime. Hey, are you looking for tickets for your next big event? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, a sporting event, whatever it is, finding the right tickets at the best price can be an absolute headache. But with GameTime Picks, man, it has never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With GameTime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so that you don't have to waste time searching through everything else, all the just pointless ticket listings that you're never going to buy. I've been using GameTime Picks for a while now, and it really is helpful to me. For example, maybe you're looking for tickets for the big game coming up this Sunday. Let me encourage you in this. Keep waiting, because one of the things I found on GameTime is where it kind of shows like the best window to buy tickets in. So keep waiting. Prices keep getting lower and lower. Typically, there's a bump 1 and 2 days out, and then it goes back down again. So if you're wanting to buy tickets for Sunday, maybe day of, or if not, do it 3 days out. That seems to be the sweet spot. And you're covered, by the way, with GameTime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, 110% of that money refunded to you. So are you ready to make your next event even better? Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. With Hubert Davis confirming on Monday night that he does in fact want to hire a GM, like saying it definitively, I love that. What does it mean for Carolina? Does it guarantee success? All of that kind of stuff. Well, let me just put it bluntly. There are no guarantees of success with this move. There is no guarantee that, let's say Carolina does miss the NCAA tournament again this year. There is literally no guarantee that hiring a GM is going to put you back in the tournament next year, or that you will get a good seed in that tournament. Literally not. Carolina, in the past several years, it's up and down. It flux, right? But here's what I will say. Hiring a GM, hiring the staff that go along with and around that GM, while it may not guarantee success, it gives you a better chance at it. It gives you a higher percentage opportunity to put yourself in the best position to win. And that to me is worth that investment. One of my favorite, I love to play fantasy football. I followed kind of Matthew Berry's advice and insight into fantasy football for the longest time. And like his key foundational thing to winning at fantasy football is to mitigate risk, limit risk. So like first, second round, take a shot on it, or not take a shot, but get the sure thing. Take your shots later. And I say that in this context to say, one of the ways to mitigate your risk is to get somebody to help you manage a roster, because that's what you need in this day and age. And if I'm identifying what to me is the biggest problem this year, and I know there's a lot of debate about X's and O's and all that kind of stuff, but the biggest issue for Carolina this year is simply the roster construction. Joel Berry said as much on ACC Network the other day. And so what can help you overcome that? A general manager, right? And so again, no guarantees of success, but this is moving in the right direction. Give Coach Hubert Davis this opportunity with the roles that he needs. To not do so, in my opinion, would be athletic administration negligence. And look, if you make this move, you hire this, and next year still doesn't go well, it's kind of hard at some level because of the give and take of things in the transfer portal era. But if you do this and next year doesn't go well and this year ends the way that things are going right now, then I feel like maybe your hands are tied and you got to have some conversations, some very difficult conversations. But until such time, until we get to that point, I'm going to call on myself and all Tar Heels to be all in with this staff. Give them a fair shake, man. Let them have their day. And if it doesn't come, fine, we'll get there then. But I just feel like that is what we owe them to let them work this out. And again, hiring a GM can't and won't account for everything because there's so many different things at play. But it is a big deal and it is a big thing, even though it's not everything. So the question then turns to, where do you go? Who to get? What route do you go to get him or her? There's a couple different categories I've thought about, at least initially, right? Like this is going to be something we're going to have to continue to unpack over the next days and weeks and whatever. But the first thing I think of is an established GM. That would be category number one for me. For example, Michael Lombardi, no brainer for Carolina football. He's an established GM. He's an established GM with rapport with Bill Belichick. It just makes sense. These dudes know like everything each other is thinking. And so you go for that. The problem in college basketball and frankly in college football is you don't specifically have enough years of NIL and transfer portal stuff to have firmly established college basketball GMs. You do have some that have been at it for 2-3 years now. Sure, absolutely. But long-standing 5, 10, multiple decade GMs at the college basketball level, you just don't have that. So if you want an established GM, you almost have to go to the professional ranks, either in the NBA, G League, overseas in a professional league, something like that, to find that kind of role or that kind of experience, I guess I should say. But there's also guys that have some level of NBA background, even if they're not a current NBA GM or assistant to the GM or that kind of thing, right? It doesn't have to just be a GM, but somebody with some of that experience. So I think that is certainly probably where I would look first, an established GM of some type. Number two, an up-and-comer. I think this is a great way, as Carolina's trying to get in on this GM game, to find somebody themselves whose star is ascending and rising right now. Last year, Carolina hired, I mentioned it earlier, a de facto GM in TJ Beisner. He wasn't given that title, but he was kind of given that role. And, with the actual coaches, assistants, head coach, that's all Coach Davis has been keeping that all in the Carolina family. But clearly he was willing to go outside of that to hire TJ. So maybe he is again here. And so that widens the funnel of who you could interview and talk to and find out about them. Is there an up-and-comer that you could get? I would love to see that. A third category of person I would look at is a former Carolina player, a former maybe established player or established a former alum of Carolina. Maybe it doesn't even have to be a player. I mean, you look at what St. Bonaventure did this offseason. They went and got Woj for crying out loud for this role. So, I mean, we're dreaming big here with this thing. This is not some small potatoes, it doesn't matter kind of role. No. You need a rock star. And not somebody that's like an egomaniac. That's not what I mean, but somebody that is a rock star at this job. You got to go find that. So if you're looking within a Carolina player, maybe somebody like Anton Jameson. He's around the program a lot. He's a former NBA player. He knows what it takes to compete at the highest levels of college basketball. I'm still befuddled that Carolina didn't win a national championship with him. By the way, his name might come up later in our show. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But a guy that's got some scouting experience, things like that. I don't know if you'd go after him, but last time I was at the Dean Dome, I was sitting a couple seats away from Kyle Korver, former NBA sharpshooter. By the way, Carolina sure could use a guy with size that could shoot. Kyle Korver can identify him. I'm just saying, I don't think you can get him, but why not? Make him tell you no, right? That's what this is all about. So some of the rumors I've heard are that not that Carolina is pursuing these types of guys, but that Mitch Kupchak, obviously an NBA GM, Buzz Peterson, who's been in some of those roles and are both former Tar Heels, have been helping Carolina some in this search. And so I think that's helpful. I hope they don't just say like, same old, right? Like you want to think wisely and into the future with it. And I think the biggest thing for me, because again, I said the biggest issue for this year's team for me is roster construction. So whoever it is you get and whatever it is they do, they have to recognize that first and foremost, it's not just about getting the very best talent, but it's about getting the very best talent that fits. That's what made Carolina work so well last year, is because Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan just fit so perfectly with the talent that was already in Chapel Hill. So whoever this GM is has to be someone that has knowledge and some level of experience about making that roster construction happen. It has to be someone, and I think this is critical, that Hubert Davis will trust. Somebody that Coach Davis will hand over control to and say, man, or at least work hand in hand, right? And say, let's build this roster together. Or I trust you, make it happen, check in with me, and let's make the decisions together. But you run the day-to-day. Whatever that is, it's got to be somebody that Coach Davis will allow to do that. It's one thing to hire a GM. It's another thing to let a GM do his or her job. So we'll keep our eyes out for that. Early last week, the football schedule came out. And man, it's time to talk about it. I got some observations for you, some takeaways. We'll get to all of that and our Tuesday trivia answer coming up in just a second. The Carolina football schedule is out. And boy, the first year of the Bill Belichick era is going to be interesting. There's always nuances to a schedule, and I'd love to walk you through it and give you my takes. Let me just run through it. I'm sure you can pull it up wherever you're watching or looking. But Carolina kicks off first game on Labor Day, September 1st, Monday versus TCU. It's that spotlight game, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. That's big time and is a clear and obvious sign that the Bill Belichick train is a thing that we all want to get on board. So that's Monday. That very Saturday, Carolina is at Charlotte, September 6th. The next Saturday, September 13th, hosting Richmond. The next Saturday, the 20th, heading down to Central Florida to play at UCF. September 27th is an open date. And then Carolina opens ACC play hosting Clemson on Saturday, October 4th. Wow. And then another open date the very next week. That is October 11th. And then this one could be one of 2 days, either Thursday, October 16th or Friday the 17th. Carolina plays at Cal. And then the next Saturday after that, they host Virginia. That's October 25th. And then the next Friday, Halloween, it's going to get spooky. Carolina goes up to Syracuse. That'll be fun to play on Halloween Day. And then it's all Saturdays the rest of the way from there. November 8th, Carolina hosts Stanford. November 15th, Carolina is at Wake. November 22nd, Carolina hosts Duke. And then Saturday, November 29th, that's the Saturday after Thanksgiving, Carolina is at NC State. And just for those who care, the next Saturday, December 6th, is the ACC championship game. I got several takes for you as we look at this schedule, and it's an interesting schedule with several interesting nuances. The first thing that jumped out at me is Literally the entire season, all 12 games flips back and forth between home and away. Never does Carolina play 2 road games in a row or 2 home games in a row. Isn't that crazy? Listen, versus TCU at Charlotte, versus Richmond at UCF, versus Clemson at Cal, versus Virginia at Syracuse, home to Stanford at Wake, home to Duke at NC State. Flip, flop, flip, flop, flip, flop. I probably will go back and look at some point, but I don't remember anything like that happening. It's pretty crazy. And I'm curious if it's a good thing or bad thing or indifferent thing, but it is a thing for sure. One of the things you notice in terms of non-con versus ACC play is that it's the same schedule format as last year, where all 4 of Carolina's non-conference games are played up front in the first 4 weeks of the season before the final 8 are all ACC games. And so that's just an interesting thing to see and look at. And what's interesting, what's kind of nice is that you've got a perfect demarcation line. After those first 4 games, you get an open week before starting ACC play. Next item that I want to point out, I think it's super fun to have a game on Halloween night, right? Like, I don't know if that means bigger crowd or smaller crowd or just normal size crowd, but a lot of people are dressed up. I don't know what to expect up at Syracuse. But I am thankful that game's in a dome on Halloween night because it's going to be cold in upstate New York. I'll tell you that right now, and we'll see what happens. Next, as you look at the end of the regular season, last 3 games are at Wake versus Duke at NC State. So you got Carolina playing all 3 of the other ACC North Carolina schools in the final 3 weeks of the regular season. That's a really interesting triumvirate there. And beyond that, when you combine that with the Stanford game that's the week before that, how about this? For the month of November, Carolina does not leave the state of North Carolina because you host Stanford, you go to Wake, you host Duke, and you go to NC State. So literally the farthest Carolina will have to travel in the month of November is Winston-Salem and then Raleigh. That's the only 2 road trips. So that's nice. You don't have many open dates on the back end. In fact, you got none. But at least you don't have to travel far. That will be helpful. Next observation from me. There's nothing like starting off ACC play against the reigning ACC champion Clemson Tigers. And so there's that. It's like, let's dive right on into this Bill Belichick era and see what's going to happen. And that'll be interesting. But what's helpful about that is that Clemson game is bookended by 2 open weeks. There's an open week before and an open week after. The one before is kind of nice because, as I said, it's a demarcation line between non-con play and ACC play. The one after is nice because you play Clemson, you have an open week, and then you got to go to Cal on a Thursday or Friday night. And that makes that a little bit tougher. But the nice thing is on the back end of that Cal game, you also have, because it's a Thursday or Friday, you get an extra day or 2, depending on which one it actually is, before hosting Virginia. So you're back home. You're hosting Virginia in the South Soldiers rivalry, and you get an extra day or 2. And so that's nice in terms of recovery after coming back from being out on the West Coast. And so that's pretty great there. That said, with those open weeks, you've got 4 games, open week in week 5, Clemson, and then open week in week 7, meaning that because you've got those 2 open weeks up front, you've got 7 straight weeks of ACC games. It's broken up a little bit because you got the Friday for Halloween and the Thursday or Friday for Cal, but everything else is on a Saturday. So no rest for the weary, and you don't have any bye games on the back end there. A lot of times you'll see teams like maybe that week before the rivalry game play like Campbell or somebody like that. So there's none of that. Loaded or not loaded, but it's front loaded with the non-con portion of the schedule, back loaded with ACC, and 7 straight weeks of ACC games. That's going to be very difficult. Coach Belichick, Lombardi, they're going to have to build depth on this team because they're going to have to be able to sustain all of that. And so we'll see what happens with it. And if Carolina, I don't know what to expect, man. It's wild. They're keeping it under lock and key. And I kind of like that. Let's not let everybody know what we're doing. Sure, that's the Belichick way. But, man, it makes it hard to know what to expect with this team. We'll see. So that's the schedule. That's my takeaways from it. I love to know what you're looking at and thinking about when you see this schedule as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd also love to know where you're at on the GM thing. Do you agree with me? Like, let's not move on from Hubert Davis until we know what he can do with the full GM and support staff with that, right? That's how I feel. I'd love to know if you feel differently, because I love those conversations, man. Never shy away from that. Like, bring it on. Let's have the talks. I like hard talks. I know that, like, sometimes I'm going to have good takes. Sometimes I'm going to have bad takes, but that's fun. That's what this engagement is all about. So thanks for diving in on it with me. If you haven't subscribed to Locked On Tar Heels before, please do so right now on YouTube. Help us get to 10,000 subscribers in the first 3 years of the show, which is the end of February here. And we are about 210 people away. You can be the very next one to help us meet that goal. If you've not joined Locked On Tar Heels Discord, we'd love to have you there. It's free to join, the links in the show notes. A great community of Tar Heels fans. And then the Locked On Tar Heels Insider Program is a way to go even deeper with us. One-on-one talks with me, other great perks as well. It's a great way to help support the show for just the cost of like one coffee a month. Easy peasy, right? I'll buy you some free other caffeine somewhere else. That'll be great. All right, guys, you know the drill. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Again, no midweek game tomorrow, so we'll just keep rolling with content until we get toward the weekend and hosting Pitt on Saturday. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow, but until then, peace.